and in Salt Lake City, as you guys know. And we're glad to bring this to people both here and outside of the summit. Our guest for the last segment today, but we will be back tomorrow. But today we have Ben Nelson, founder and CEO of Minerva. Thanks for joining us.
Huge pleasure. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me here.
So I want to say that, for people who don't know, Minerva is the kind of like this, it feels like it started out as like something maybe over a beer with friends of like, what if you could just start a whole university from scratch?
Yeah, and that's just to start a whole new, like, what if you start the world's best university?
Oh, right, I'm sorry, it'll be competing with the top universities.
Yeah, starting in a university, people have done that before, right? But yeah.
And it'll be a for-profit company.
Mm-hmm. It'll be a corporation that will then build a system that will enable an existing nonprofit university to create the best university in the world, and then will then be able to go and influence other institutions to follow suit. That was
so you actually did it, and actually I think it's interesting. You were a student at the University of Pennsylvania, and this was like a student project.
This was
essentially idea of this.
Essentially, yeah. In fact, we just had our the end of our school year, and during the last Saturday after the end of our school year, we had this thing called symposium where students were presenting their final freshman year projects. And they were working with civic partners and thinking about, here's how to solve, issues about littering or homelessness or what we do with a kind of communal space that's run by Burning Man. So all sorts of interesting projects in the city. Yeah. And I told them, 23 years ago, effectively that week, I submitted a freshman paper, and the freshman paper was about how to reform the curriculum at the University of Pennsylvania. And that paper effectively is Minerva. It of course has evolved and morphed, and it's become its own institution as opposed to a reform of an existing institution. But that really was an idea I had as a freshman in university and how to fix the place. And so it was kind of a message for them to, not just think about, this is a small project, but think about it as always kind of keep it in the back of your mind, because you may wake up one day and you'll discover that it's your life's work.
I want to just, for people who don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to quickly try to summarize what I think seems like the way Minerva works.
Great.
Because it's not traditional campus, that's your point.
Yeah.
So you have university students, they are in the university meant to be a 4-year replacement for a traditional university.
It is a university. It's an accredited degree.
It's not just it's not a coding boot camp that only does coding.
Correct.
And the students are in the same place physically, as far as they all live in the same city, and then they actually move cities, but we'll talk about that now. And yet there's no classroom. You've not built a single classroom.
Correct.
And instead, they all, much like the system we're on right now, they all are heads in boxes, and they log in from the coffee shop or their living space, wherever.
Exactly.
And so, but the professor, they're all synchronous. They're all at the same time.
It's all at the same time.
They don't just phone it in later.
Exactly.
And so they have to be on.
They have to be on at all times. Classes
much like I hope our audience is real attentive right now.
Exactly.
We'll ask them questions.
They're in this.
So it's like this, and this is of course a riddle to some people, and you're trying all these different things. But one of the things that I'm really curious about, and I cover this, new experiments and models, but by trying to throw out the old way of teaching and try this new, and one of the things I hear what are something that kind of you tried and it didn't work and you've learned from it, because I know that for instance, one of the things I heard you did do, and this might be a good one, but I don't know, you tell me whether it's good or bad, but there was like, it was a situation like this, and students are all learning, and there's like a gong that goes off, and then at that moment when the gong goes off, a different student has to finish the answer just to keep everyone on their toes.
Yeah, that works really well.
Okay, so that one's not, but is there anything you've tried in this kind of,
so
it didn't work?
Yeah, so let me kind of backtrack a little bit and explain why. Right? Why is that all of our students live together, yet we do not allow them to congregate in a room for formal class.
Wow, okay. You don't even allow.
No, we don't. That is not an option. If you're in class, you have to have a camera pointing at your face.
Right. You can't sit there with your buddy and be
Exactly. And the reason for that is very simply that you can do things using technology, using data, you simply cannot do offline. And so the entire Minerva philosophy, so when I initially came up with this curriculum 23 years ago, there was no web. I mean, the graphical interface browser came out basically that year.
Okay.
And I never thought of using technology to do education.
You weren't thinking live stream
not
video.
At all. I wasn't thinking. I was thinking about a very traditional classroom.
Sure.
But the problem was it wasn't practical. Because if you want to teach students, as we do, more than 100 different elements, learning objectives, that then not only they learn during their first year, but then they apply in their second, third, fourth year, going from class to class, professor to professor, you just can't do that offline. It's impossible. So not only is it hard to make sure all the students are fully engaged at all times, not only is it hard to make sure that professors are engaging them and making sure they're following lesson plan, etc., but it is impossible to collect data from what students know and then pass it off from one to the other. And so everything we do is very puritanical, right? And not puritanical in kind of the classical sense, but we really are trying to create an ideal learning environment. So you asked about something that we tried and didn't work. I'll give you a very, this may sound silly, but actually for us, it really matters. So class participation of Minerva is mandatory. Mandatory.
You can't just call it.
You can't. Yeah, you can't. You have to come.
Okay.
And so in our very first year, in our founding class year, we had this policy, and we said, look, you have to go to class because class you get great. There are no tests, so you get graded on what you say in class and on your project work. And so basically, we said, you can miss 2 classes a semester, right? So something occurs, all the rest. 2 classes you get to miss every semester per course. And so what happened was our students said, okay, that sounds good, and thanks for that. And they worked very hard and they made sure that they attended every class, they weren't missing anything. And then the end of the semester was approaching, and our students started saying, oh, when do we which classes should we be missing? Right? So how can we strategically use them because we want to go to Yosemite or this and that? And we were horrified. Right? I mean, oh my God, this is crazy.
You told them exactly how many 2
Yeah,
miss.
exactly. We told them how many 2 miss, and not that this was a maximum. And so we went on this 2-year journey to find a better system, right? And created penalties, and if you miss the class, you have to jump on one foot and go back and forth, and there's no more 2 class thing because we didn't want to signal it. And of course, what happened is students wound up missing more classes. And so next year, we're just going back to that first system, right? Because ultimately, we don't really want a student to miss any class, but sometimes it is inevitable. All the classes are live and you have to interact, but they are recorded so that you can reference them back later. And so if you did miss it, you aren't actually missing class, and they have to write a makeup paper for missing it. But ultimately, even the Puritan instincts are sometimes go a little bit too far, and then you have to make sure that you're rational about it.
So I think it is interesting that you've described Minerva as not a tech play, but the most important thing to you being the curriculum.
Yeah.
And I asked you about the tech, but let's talk about the curriculum for a minute.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? And just, I know that there's a lot you could say, but in a very elevator pitch, what's so different about it?
Okay, so this is very hard for me, but I'll do my best. So if you think about kind of the curricular versus non-curricular struggles, right, historically, go back to the 1960s and before, the side that was pro-curriculum said, we're going to pick the books you need to study, we're going to structure it, you're going to have 3 or 4 years where you have no choice whatsoever, and then maybe you have 1 year of a major, etc. And the side that was opposed to the curriculum said, how could you possibly pick which texts I should read versus what I shouldn't in this giant world of information? And I can't spend 3 years of my life doing one thing that isn't related to what I'm actually interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And so and eventually that side won, because given that rigidity, it didn't make sense for the modern world. Minerva's curriculum is really the first curriculum that exists that enables both structure. So your entire 4 years are highly, highly structured, and you have massive choice in the sense that you've got 30 different concentrations to choose from, what most places refer to as majors at Minerva refer to as concentrations. You have a senior year where you basically you can design your own courses with professors. In fact, you're required to. You have a capstone project where you pursue whatever you want. You have infinite choice, but it's informed. So the first year is this intellectual language, the foundation that informs you then what you should be looking at in your sophomore year when you approach seminal ideas that underpin a class of fields, like for example, the natural sciences or social sciences, arts, humanities, or business, etc. And then in the third year, you look at the seminal ideas that occur at the intersection of fields where knowledge is being created. And then in the fourth year, you have that free choice, but you're ready for it. And as you progress through the years, you have more and more and more choice, right? So that you can navigate throughout. But throughout the entire 4 year time span, you're using that same intellectual language, which means that you have spaced deliberate practice on all of these concepts until they become ingrained in your mind.
But of course, the university curriculum, some of the interviews I've seen, you almost describe it as if it's just kind of not thought out, but it is thought out. I mean, there is universities that have worked. Like you said, there's been debates.
There have been debates, but the result of the debates has been an abdication, right? So the results of the debates are, yes, we'll put together a curriculum in our department, right? You want to study economics, you have to take micro, you have to take macro, you have to take econometrics 1, you have to take econometrics 2, and then you have to take these other 3 courses, and then you can choose. So that's somewhat structured. But general education requirements in the United States?
So, I mean, clearly, I mean, obviously, a lot of your project is a critique of that system. So, yes. I guess I just to play devil's advocate. Yeah. It's the thing about the system was it was designed. I talk to students sometimes, and they don't know what they want to do, and they see the courses that they take at this college curriculum as a way to test things out and try on. They're doing a lot of things.
Right.
And is that happening within your curriculum?
It is, but it happens when it's an informed choice. This is the difference between informed choice and uninformed choice. Right, so the problem is, if you go to college, you have no idea what to do. You're certainly not getting good advice or good guidance. And so now you've got 1,000 course catalog from which you have to choose 8 courses. But choose wisely, because if you don't choose certain courses, entire fields of study are shut down for you, right? So if you don't take your bio, chem, physics, calc in your freshman year,
to get prereqs.
Good luck becoming, a bio major later on. And so this is actually a sense of false choice. You don't actually have that choice. And if you do find that amazing, inspiring, class in computational science your third year, it's too late. Mm-hmm. You can't switch your major then. It's over, right? Because you can't do all of those prerequisites, right? And so what we do is we have informed choice, right? So part of having a curriculum in the first year where you don't have a choice, everybody goes through the same thing, and you learn the tools that are applicable and useful in any field you may pursue, is that we also use subject matter from all of the concentrations we teach to give you an idea of what it is that you should be double clicking on.
So it does have some sampler aspect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I guess the more kind of devil's advocate there is like what. So the students are. I guess the next thing that people end up raising when I see critiques of Minerva is that it's for profit, right? That
Minerva, the schools are not, but the corporation is, right? And so pretty much every university in the world, whether they like it or not, I think most of them kind of do like it, has to use corporations for services, right? And so what university builds its own technology platform? Non-existent. Even if they use for their student information system, they'll be on an Oracle database. That's a corporation, right? They use Microsoft Word and Excel. That's a corporation, right? They get their textbooks from Pearson, from Macmillan. Those are for-profit corporations, right? They get their Harvard business case studies from the for-profit arm of Harvard University, right? And so you have everything, they outsource their cafeterias and residence halls to corporations. And that's effectively what Minerva Schools does with the Minerva project. We build technology, we put together lesson plans and materials, and we operate residence halls.
But don't some of the professors get stock options, or at least some of your academic leaders?
Yeah, of course, because if the corporation is developing intellectual property,
right,
you have to compensate. So they're on contract, right? So the faculty of the Minerva schools are also developing intellectual property for the Minerva project, but not all faculty do, by the way. So there's some faculty, all they do is they teach, a couple of sections. they don't have any interest in the Minerva project, right? But
They're
if you're
kind of adjuncts for you.
they're no, I mean they're professors at the Minerva schools, but they don't have anything to do with the Minerva
I see. It's
project.
a full-time job.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but if you're going to do work that will add to the intellectual property of the corporation, you have to be an employee or at least a consultant to it.
I mean, it makes me really curious to hear your thoughts about this Purdue announcement a couple weeks ago, where Purdue was going to buy Kaplan University, a for-profit, for $1 essentially, and kind of flip that to a Purdue campus, a state university.
Yeah.
Is that? I mean, are the way you describe it? It's almost a similar sort of,
at least from a structure
of profit and nonprofit.
Yeah, I mean, so we sometimes get kind of confused. I mean, despite the fact that the Minerva schools are nonprofit, and despite the fact that the majority of universities that we know and love are nonprofits, whether or not an institution pays taxes really doesn't mean much about how they're run or operated. Some of the most voraciously capitalistic, rather amoral institutions I've ever encountered are nonprofits. They are doing everything for the dollar, right? They don't really care about student outcomes. They don't really care about education per se. They say, oh, somebody's willing to cut me a $50 million check to let their idiot child into my university. Where do I sign? Right? And we somehow don't look at that and say, oh heavens, you naughty nonprofit, right? Somehow they have this halo of goodness when they're doing things that are, in many ways highly immoral.
There is a culture though that's, I think that, you are a challenge to the academic culture. Your whole project is this critique.
Yeah.
So that is, I mean, I think it's probably maybe the way I framed it and the way it gets framed maybe isn't as artful as it could be. But there is a difference between, even some of the people here at this conference and the way when you go to a campus and talk to longtime faculty, not always,
yes,
but there are cultures that feel steeped in one way, and then this other one that comes up through
absolutely
more business kind of.
But yes, but it's less to me about what is it that a business does that a many traditional nonprofit doesn't do, and there's this concept of being focused on a customer. Right, but the fact of the matter is that most nonprofits in higher education are customer focused. They're just focused on the wrong customer, right? Private universities are largely focused on the donor, right? Public universities are largely focused on the government, right? But almost no one is focused on the student. And the biggest difference between the nonprofit Minerva schools and the nonprofit other universities that are, that currently exist, is that we are focused completely and utterly on student outcome. That's all we're focused on. That's why we have the curriculum we have. That's why 100% of our classes are fewer than 20 students. That's why the professors are geared towards making sure students actually learn as opposed to come so they can be weeded out and things of that nature. And that really is the biggest difference. The biggest difference in the operation of, I believe, the University of the Future is focused on what occurs with students. It is not what makes the faculty happy. It is not what makes donors happy. It is not what is going to give you a higher appropriation from the state senate, right? So these are the wrong foci, and in fact, what I would contend is that, and I think what you can see in the operation of the Minerva schools, is that if you are student-centric, you have a passionately committed and excited faculty, right? You have a staff that is focused on what's right for the student and is willing to put in the extra hours and extra effort to make sure that students have that success. You have even people in the regulatory environment that say, wow, can we have more of that, right? And I think if more schools adopt that kind of philosophy, it'll actually save a whole big chunk of the higher education sector, which right now I really think is unsustainable and under threat.
Tons more we can unpack there, but in a minute I'm going to open it up to our crowd, to the audience out there. But I did want to ask, one of the things I found in an interview, you had suggested earlier on in Minerva's history that you might try to license the curriculum, and that having another revenue stream for for the Minerva, the for-profit.
Yes, yeah, correct. The corporation itself.
And is that something you're still thinking of? And how would that look? How would that work? Because that's a kind of a mind-bending idea too. Because
yes,
you don't see Harvard licensing its curriculum. Well, I guess there's some Harvard Business School
business
stuff.
case study, right? Yeah,
right.
So yes, we had initially thought that this would be many years down the road. So we,
Okay.
if you would ask me 4 or 5 years ago, when does this occur? I would tell you, probably 2025.
Something,
yeah. So in a long, long time, because the plan was, we were actually pretty straightforward, which is we're creating the world's greatest university, and then we'll go out and have graduates, and they will have do better things in the world than they could do if they went to other institutions, and then other institutions will say, hey, we want some of that, and then we will help them come along that journey. And we thought this was going to take a decade plus. And it turns out that there's an enormous amount of demand much sooner, way before we could do anything about it. So in the last 3 years, actually since this conference in 2014, which is the first time we actually showed how we're doing our teaching modality, we debuted it here exactly 3 years ago. We've received requests from about 250 institutions of higher education to work together. And unfortunately, we had to tell no to all of them because we were not ready in any way. But given that demand, we're thinking that maybe next year, maybe 2018, we'll do our first 1 or 2 pilots, and we'll see how we hope to be ready by then.
Well, that's great, and let's open it up to the audience here. And if there aren't any questions, I can still jump in. But you can actually, if you're not familiar with the platform, this is the Shindig platform for video events, and you can push the hand icon to do a video question. We'll have your screen come up, and probably sounds like a Minerva class almost, and you can ask a question, or you can text. But we'd love to hear from you all out there. And there is a question coming in, so let's roll that out. It's from Mike Bowman, and I'll just read it aloud here. It's from text. Is Minerva focused on building its own proprietary technologies for teaching and learning, or are you looking at outside solutions or opportunities?
So when we started, we thought we would use a lot of external technologies, and unfortunately, we found nothing that we could use ourselves. It was our entire educational system is based on research that we have not done. It's research that has been done by the science of learning community over the past 30, 40, 50 years.
Sure.
And we took that research and just used it systematically to think about how do you make sure that students are engaged in the material and how is it that they learn, right? So for example, this idea of fully active learning where 100% of students are engaged at least 75% of the time in class comes from the science of learning. The idea that you have spaced deliberate practice on certain concepts in multiple contexts so that the mind can have original far transfer, which is actually the core of what education actually is, even though that's not employed.
And this far transfer idea, essentially like down the road you'll remember it or link it? Is that the idea?
Exactly, yeah. So, and that you'll be able to apply it in an original context. So you learned an idea in the economics class, and then you are dealing with a relationship and you're able to use that principle in managing a more effective relationship.
Okay.
Right. That is something that the mind is singularly terrible at and does not happen naturally. This is why we think of, wisdom. When I say wise blank man, right? Your blank is old, right? I mean, that is what you assume, because the assumption is that wisdom takes time. And in fact, if you're not taught systemically, it's true. What happens is that you make the same mistakes in context after context after context your entire life. And then
because you hit a new context.
Because you hit a new context, and you make the same mistake again. And then decades of making these mistakes later, your brain finally does pattern matching. You attain wisdom, and then you drop dead, right? Because you're old, right? And so wisdom in many ways is wasted on the old. And of course, they try to impart it on the young, and they don't listen to them because they're like, "What do you know, right? Like you're not of our era." And this is actually the problem. And but the role of education is to actually bring that systemic wisdom earlier. And the way to do that is to help do that abstraction and recontextualization during an undergraduate or a set of years. You could do it in a number of different areas. The undergraduate years are particularly fruitful because you're at an age where you still have pretty substantial brain plasticity, but you're developed enough in your educational cycle where you can introduce higher order thinking. And so that's a pretty potent combination. So anyway, in order to do all of those things, we really thing that was out there. Actually, one of the reasons that we've had so much demand for what it is that we do is that people have thought incorrectly that they could just license our technology, which we won't let them do.
Like a product you buy off the shelf.
Yeah, exactly. And say, oh, like I'd love to teach my Bio 101 course on your platform.
Sure.
That's not possible.
Well, we have a video question. So let's bring up, this is going to take, everyone bear with us. It's Gretchen, and Gretchen will join us now. Gretchen, thank you. Do you have a question for Ben?
Hi, Ben. Thanks. And I'm going to pick up on this theme of wisdom and the importance of it. I love the example that you're giving and talking about transfer and application, which is so closely linked to creativity and the difficult thing to teach. So my question for you is, how does Minerva evaluate success in, I would describe, another way of describing that is students learning how to learn. That seems basic to what you're doing. How do you think, and that it's not technology dependent, so how do you do that?
Exactly. Yeah, so that's crucial. And there are really two ways in which Minerva makes sure that the educational system is working. So the first one is by componentizing, and I'll explain what that means in a second. And the second one is by repeated spaced deliberate practice. So learning how to self-learn is a crucial example. So at Minerva, we don't disseminate any information. We don't do it, right? We think it's, again, not a moral thing to do to have you pay a university $5,000 to read a book out loud to you. I have a 6-year-old, and she's done with me reading books out loud to her because she already knows how to read. And I don't suspect that 12 years from now she'll want to revert, and certainly not pay for it. So learning to learn is actually a requirement of Minerva, because you actually do both all of your content acquisition and understanding before you come to class. And class is all about application. And so part of the ways in which we do it is we make sure that you constantly demand the kinds of behaviors that you would expect your students to perform. However, that's not enough. It's not enough just to say, go and learn on your own and you'll pick it up over time. You have to provide the component parts of the componentization that I was referencing earlier on how to self-learn. And so much like the elements of what we teach, and self-learning traverses all of our broad capacities. We have these 4 broad capacities on how to think critically, how to think creatively, how to interact effectively, and how to communicate effectively. And there are 115 different kinds of habits of mind and foundational concepts that underpin all of these broad capacities. And so in order to do, for example, and self-learning, by the way, has elements of a number of those different components. And so what we try to do is try to teach some of those habits and concepts early on in your first year, and effectively set you up ready to do this later on. But as an idea to throw out there into the ether, and certainly one that we get to answer a lot, we're often asked, what should the pre-Minerva curriculum look like? What are the things that you'd like your students to have coming into Minerva, rather than you having to kind of deal with teaching them? And one of the most important components is learning the self-learning, which I actually think is too late to do in your freshman year of college. It should be done really in high school.
Well, we are about at time. Do we have any other questions out there? If you will,
rapid fire.
We could. Yeah, I like that. Do we have any out there, Chris?
We have one more.
Yeah. Well, let's take the question then, if that's all right. Then.
Sure.
Okay. So, access versus prestige.
Yeah.
I'll read this aloud. I don't know if it's on everyone's screen or not, but pardon if I'm reading to people. It seems that you're focused on being the best university in the world. Is that the value proposition like Harvard and Princeton? Where do you see things going in terms of the accessibility and scaling? That's a really important question.
Yeah, it's a super important question. And so you have to understand kind of the two parts to what it is that we're trying to do. So first and foremost, the Minerva schools, what the Minerva schools trying to do is, it is true, the Minerva schools are the most selected university in the Western world. We had
and you have a very small class.
We have a very, very small class. So we have a lot of applicants in a very small class, even though we're not size constricted on our class. So we grow the institution based on the number of qualified students we find.
How many is the latest class? Just to give us a ballpark.
So the class that just finished our freshman year was 158 students, and we received 16,000 applicants for those spots. It was our second class ever, and they just finished their freshman year. And so so you could look at that and say, oh my God, that is so elitist and so hard to get into that, like, what's the point? Well, first, it redefines the concept of elite. So in a traditional Ivy League university, 50% of the student body comes from the 1% wealthiest households in the world. At Minerva, about 5% of our student body comes from the 1% wealthiest households in the world. And it's not because we try to find non-wealthy students. It's because we only focus on merit. And because we only focus on merit, and because merit is broadly distributed across geography, socioeconomic class, race, religion, creed, gender, you get a massively diverse class, right? Almost 80% of our students are not from the United States, right? 81% of our students require some form of financial assistance, despite the fact that we charge $40,000 less than our closest competitors, right? And so we have a very different view of access when it comes to the institution itself. But more broadly, the Minerva project, the corporation's goal on access, is to reform the rest of higher education globally. And this actually speaks as to why the Minerva schools are so selective. They're most selective, again, for two reasons. The first reason is that all of the research that Minerva is based on, all of the research on the science of learning, has shown repeatedly that these types of techniques have the biggest impact on students that don't do well, right? So if you already use fully active learning or active engagement with excellent students, there's not that much more that you can do. And so the fact that we are actually showing substantial improvements with an extremely selective group of students means that it is much more broadly applicable as you go, quote unquote, downstream. Secondly, in higher education, like it or not, people pay attention to elite schools, right? There's all sorts of interesting, innovative approaches in universities all over the world that nobody cares about because they're not the quote unquote best. But when universities at the top, whether they're existing or new, come in and have major reform, effectively everybody follows. And as a case in point, you may look at this as ancient history, but in the 1870s, you had an institution called Johns Hopkins that took the German research university model, brought it to the United States, and married it with the American liberal arts college tradition. And within a decade, half of American colleges became research universities. And at the time, by the way, Harvard was 240 years old. It wasn't a spring chicken, right? And Harvard reformed, and reformed fast, right? Similarly, you can look 15 years ago to the start of Olin College. And Olin was an engineering
but it's
school.
Got a very different model of teaching. Yeah.
Very, very different model of teaching, much more hands-on, extremely effective. The biggest changes to MIT's and Caltech's curricula over the last 50 years were because of Olin, right? They weren't because of everything they knew before. It was because somebody came in and did it better at a higher level.
Do you think we'll see more traditional nonprofit universities, we all know these brands, becoming or having these for-profit kind of engines that they have to develop their own curriculum and tools?
Again, it's unclear to me whether or not they're going to use for-profit or nonprofit engines, but I am convinced that they're going to be changed quite radically.
The curriculum.
You know, how they have no choice, right? You cannot continue when there is a better, demonstrably better alternative. You're not going to have Harvard and Stanford say, oh, okay, we're perfectly happy being second. That's not in their DNA, nor should it be, right? And when you have reform at that level, you're going to have reform throughout the whole sector.
Well, I want to thank you again. Like I said, thank you for sticking around for overtime as well.
Right.
And we will be watching what you're up to. And thank you to the audience for those great questions and for sticking with us today.
Thanks so much.
This has been great. Thanks, man. And thank you all again for joining us. We'll be back tomorrow. And actually, you know, we are. I should have said this earlier. We've added a couple. We're gonna add a bonus speaker, and so we're gonna be on at 12:30 instead of 1. We will update the schedule. We'll be pushing this out on social media, and we've juggled a little bit. Candace still will be first up from Stanford, so we're excited to have a full day tomorrow, and we'll join you then. Thank you.